welcome to the stream section. I'll be talking about a bit of Nigerian history today and mostly African history. As we go forward, guys, I urge you to stay tuned. Don't forget to always follow this channel and yeah, stay involved. Leave your comments, leave your questions. We'll be talking about some of the questions that have been raised in the course of this discussion. Today, I want to talk about a very important topic, which is the Jihad of 1804 and 1805 and how it shaped the modern history of Nigeria. For those of you that are not familiar with Nigeria, Nigeria is a country in West Africa. It is the northern part of Nigeria is in the Sahel, and Nigeria is one of the most important countries in Africa in terms of population because it has the market. It has a lot of industrious young people working. Some of them are in diaspora all over the world working and sending money back home, which is important. And also, in terms of our contribution to Africa, economy, politically, Nigeria is, I would argue, the most important country in Africa, even to entertainment. So it's important for us to learn about the history of Nigeria. So the topic for our conversation today is the Jihad of 1804 and how that shaped the history of modern Nigeria. We're going to break it down into different segments. We're going to start and look at the overview, talking about the diverse history of Nigeria and the culture. We're going to look at the importance of the Sokoto Caliphate in shaping northern Nigeria today. And we'll be raising some key questions on how the Jihad of 1804 led by Uthman and Fodio, shaped and influenced the history of modern Nigeria. So before I begin, I want to tell you guys that if you're new on my page, if you're following us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, make sure to subscribe and follow and hit the like button and get to these videos because it's very important for us to continue to put out contents like this. This is going to be a 1 hour conversation about the Jihad of 1804 and how it shaped the history of modern Nigeria. So I'm going to give you guys between 1 or 2 minutes to digest what the introduction I just gave, and let's share this live stream to more people and get more people engaged in this conversation. In that way, it's easier for me to see some of your questions and see the engagement, and it's easier for us to continue the conversation. So please, like I said, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube if you're just joining, and also connect with me on Facebook and other platforms if that is where you're watching us from. So I'm going to share the live stream myself. And for those of you just joining, don't forget to share the live stream. It's going to be a blockbuster. It's going to be very, very informative. It's going to be the history of Nigeria. Nigeria, like I said, is the most important country in Africa. Population, economy. Yeah, I talked about the demography, the politics. Nigeria is involved at every level. So there's no way you can talk about Africa without understanding the importance of Nigeria. And looking at the history of Nigeria is also very important for this conversation. So, like I said, we're going to use the next 3 minutes to share this video. You can share it as well if you're watching the video after the live stream. You can share this video on other platforms. If you're watching it from Facebook, you can share it to different groups. If you're watching on YouTube, you can share it to different platforms as well. Let's get involved and engage in the conversation. Let's go. So I'm gonna try to share the video myself. Let's see. Let's see. Okay. Video on other platforms if you want. I'm going to share it to um let's see. I'm gonna share it here. I'm gonna share it on the group. Mm. So, like I said, if you're just joining, please share the stream. Let's get more people active and involved. Yeah, it's very important. Very, very important. Let's go, guys. Don't forget to join. Don't forget to share. If you're watching us on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, anywhere you're watching us from, kindly share this. Mm, yeah, that's all I'm gonna do at the moment. Okay, let's go. Um, so, if you're just joining, you're welcome. Trying to share and to participate in the conversation, more groups, share to more people, and we're going to start the conversation about the history of Nigeria as it relates to what precip- what led to the Jihad of 1804, 1805, all led us to this point. It's going to be an informative conversation. So, all right, welcome back, welcome back. Like I said, if you're watching us on any platform, if it's Facebook, if it's YouTube, we have two pages active on Facebook. It's Savak Media, but Savak is the main one, the one with like 21K followers. It's a page that I've stopped using for a bit, but I want to still start being active on this platform, and it helps a lot. So we're going to be talking about what led to the Reformation in 1804, led by Uthman and Fodio, and the Jihad of 1804, particularly in the northern part of Nigeria. So I'm going to give you guys a succinct break down and itemize some of the topics or some of the key points of our conversation. Like I said, the history is going to be it's going to be historical presentation and discussion on the Jihad of 1804 and the making of modern Nigeria. And this conversation is going to last for about an hour or thereabout. And we're going to be discussing the Jihad of 1804, like I said, and the history of modern Nigeria. And I'll give you a background on the diverse history of Nigeria, the importance of the Sokoto Caliphate in shaping the history of modern Nigeria. And the key question is, how did the Jihad of 1804 influence modern Nigeria? So, in the first part of our conversation, we're going to be talking about the Hausa city states. For instance, Kano, one of the city states, Katsina was there, Zaria, and Gobir. So, these four city states were in existence prior to the incursion by the Fulanis from Futatoro and Futajalon, which is another conversation we are going to have to understand where Futatoro is and Futajalon. And I'm going to show you guys on the map as well for you to see exactly what really happened in that part of West Africa. If you take a look at the map of Nigeria from, and I think I'm going to put it up for a second for you guys to see. So I'm going to put up the map of Nigeria. I'm going to share my screen so you guys can see. Give me a second. The map of Nigeria. I'm going to see. All right. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys. Give me a second. Okay, this is what the map of Nigeria looks like. I have to. Let's see. Give me a second. Ooh, this is interesting. So this is what the map of Nigeria looks like basically, and I'm going to show you how it is from the north to the south, so you guys can have a clear idea. Now, if you take a look at this map, if you look at this is Africa. So I'm going to zoom into Nigeria. This is the location of Nigeria. So the northern part of Nigeria borders Niger. It borders Chad in the east and Cameroon in the east. You can see Garua and Marwa and Jamena. And Jamena, by the way, is on the tripod. It's on the key corridor between the border between Meduguri, Cameroon, and Chad. And this place is a very volatile area, particularly the area around Meduguri, Marwa and Garwa and Jamena. This is where people talk about the Boko Haram activity and whatever is happening across the Lake Chad area. This is where it's happening. Okay, so this is like for you guys to understand the geography of Nigeria. Now, if you take a look at Nigeria, Nigeria is bifurcated in two halves. But let's see. So you see Kano in the north, Meduguri in the east, not west as they call it, but although it's in the northern, it's in the far north, like we say, but it's in you see Meduguri on the other side, and if you zoom in a bit, you see Sokoto, which is close to the border with Niger. So this is what Nigeria looks like. The northern part, largely Hausa speaking and other ethnic groups that live in the north. Then the Fulanis actually came from the north. The Fulanis came from places like Niger and Chad. But if you look at the history of the Fulanis, most of them came from Futatoro and Futajalo. So Futatoro is what you call modern day Senegal and modern day Gambia. You know, they came from the coast. You know, the Fulanis came from this place and made incursions all the way to the east. They are from the western part of West Africa, but they moved and continue to move towards the east of Africa. And this is how they came in and they started the Reformation in 1804, 1880, or 1805, what they call the Jihad of 1804, 1805, 1804 in particular, until it was established in 1808. So the Emirates was established in 1808. So it lasted for a period of 4 years. So these are the key points you need to note down. We're talking today about the history of modern Nigeria and how the Fulani Jihad of 1804 reshaped the history of Nigeria. So I'm giving you a background for you guys to understand, but it's also important for you to to see the map and see, you know, the geographical positioning of Nigeria for you to have a clear idea on how this happened and how these invaders came from the outside, or as they call them, the foreigners that came from the outside. You know, and when they came, the Fulanis, the Hausas were living in city states. There are about four of them. There was the Kano, there was the Zaria, there was the Gobir, and I think was the last one was, I think, Castina. I'm not really sure. Yeah, Castina was the last one. Kano is the number one. Katsina was another city state. Zaria is another city state. Zaria, by the way, is a historic town. It's one of the biggest towns or cities in Kaduna State, which is in the northwestern part of Nigeria. You know, it's about 180 kilometers or about 200 kilometers away from Abuja, which is the capital city of Nigeria. So the history of Zaria goes back a long time. By the way, like I said, if you're just joining, don't forget to share. This is very informative. This is very, very informative. This is what I teach or educate some of my undergrad students or talk to even some MSc students about. Topics like this is very, very informative. It's very important. If you want to know about African history and cult and civilization, this is very important. So, like I said, the background to that is that there were four important Hausa city states before when the Fulanis came in and brought in the jihad. And what they had at that point was corruption. You know, there was, because this was the belief actually, that there was corruption, there was social inequality, and there was religious syncretism. Because the Hausas were practicing their own traditional beliefs, they were practicing, you know, their own traditional culture. They're having their own ways of life before the Fulanis came. It's not as if Islam was not there at that point, but the Hausas were mixing up and blending Islam with animism, which is like a traditional African religion. They were mixing it up. And when the Fulanis came, they saw themselves as puritanical, they saw themselves as civilized and as religious. this cannot continue. And by the way, for you guys to understand, this is also connected to the history of the Ottoman Empire because the Fulanis um, represented the expansionism and the expansionist idea of the Ottoman Empire at that time. So the guy called Ottoman Dan Fodio was actually implementing the ideas of the Ummah, or it was like a global jihad to conquer and to spread the Ummah across um, not just across the Middle East, but also all the way from North Africa down to East Africa. So the Fulanis were at that point have received the message. The Fulanis at that point were have known about it, and they saw themselves as more civilized in the sense, or had more understanding of Islam as a religion, as a culture, and that the Fulanis, they believe the Hausas in northern Nigeria as well, that were living, and practicing their own system and mixing Islam up with traditional African belief and systems were doing it wrongly. So the Fulanis came in and wanted to, institute what they call a reform. Like I said, you can go back to the history of the imamates of Futatoro and Futajalon. So this is what I'm trying to show to you. So, but this is the history of Nigeria, by the way, in the lead up to. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you guys can see my face. I hope you guys. So if you have any question as we go along, leave the questions because it helps me and guide me in the course of giving this in the course of this conversation. We need questions, so we'll be able to address them. Like I said, I'm going to break it down into parts. The first part, again, I already talked about the history of the Fulanis and how the Fulanis came from the north, and I showed you the map. I'm going to put up the map again for you guys to understand. So, but the Fulanis you call today are called Fulbe or Pule. The French call them Pule or the Fulbe, and they are in different categories. You have the Mbororo, the Fulbe Adamawa. I'm going to put up a picture for you to see of the Fulanis, so you can see how they look like. They come in different types, but they call them. You have the Fulbe Adamawa, you have the Mbororo, you have. So I'm going to share my screen with you one more time for you guys to see. To the most famous Amadu Bello, ABU, yes, Amadu Bello University is in Zaria. It's also home to the Nigerian Defense Academy. No, it's in Kaduna State, but you also have the infantry, the School of Infantry is in Zaria. So it is home to a lot of prominent institutions in Nigeria, particularly in northern Nigeria. It's a traditional place. It is particularly if you guys want to look at the history of Zaria, you can look at the history of the Queen Amina of Zazao. So the Hausas call it Zazao. So you can look at the history of Queen Amina, who was one of the fiercest warriors, in the history of Nigeria. People talk about misogyny and women not being Yeah, Queen Amina was one of the greatest warriors in Hausa history and folklore, and she was from Zaria, and people revere her. So it's a traditional town. So for those of you that have any intention of visiting Nigeria, if you have to go to the historical town of Zaria. Zaria is very, very important. So I'm going to put up a picture for you guys to see the Fulanis, and sorry, I'm going to share my screen one more time. So this is how the Fulanis look like. You have them. So this picture you're seeing with them painting their face, the men, you see they have a particular event they call the Jerewol. So during the Jerewol, it's like the initiation into adulthood or manhood, by the Fulani men, and they're dressed in this very beautiful costume, and most of them made to paint their face to look handsome so they can get the mate. So this is what the Jerewol looks like. This is the Jerawol. So they have, an amazing culture, and the history goes back in time. But again, if you really understand what I'm saying about the Fulanis and you bring it back, because I've posted some videos about the clashes between the Fulanis and the sedentary African farmers in Nigeria and in West Africa as a whole. And a lot of people do not understand what I mean, but they understand the farmer header crisis, which is a conflict that is known around the world, particularly happening in West and even East Africa. And the clashes between the nomadic people and the sedentary people, you can look at the Fulanis, and you can once you look at the Fulanis or talk about the Fulanis, you understand exactly what I'm saying. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can continue the conversation. Like I said, if you have any question, you want to ask, if you want to be part of this conversation and talk about anything, is important. And if you believe there's anything you want me to address, let's go. But let's talk about the Pule or the Hausa or what they call the Fulbe. They are widely dispersed ethnic group from across West Africa and Central Africa, all the way to East Africa, by the way, because you have the same Fulanis in places um, the Blue Nile State in the Darfur area, and also Blue Nile, Darfur, Kordofan, and even all the way to places like Central African Republic. You know, one of the most powerful warlords during the Central African uh, Civil War, or the Bush War as they call it, was a Fulani guy. And actually, if you look at his history, he was from Nigeria. So he was part of a group called the Seleka, although he leads his own special own group, and they all work under the leadership of a guy called Michel Jotodia, who later became president and served for a period of a year and a half or about 2 years before he was removed. You know, remember that the French came in with Operation Sangaris, and then they came in with another UN mission called Operation MINUSCA. But that is a completely different story. Let's focus on the history of the Fulanis. But I'm telling you that the Fulanis, a lot of people malign them particularly and talk about them in a bad light. And some of them are actually, because they are nomads, they move from place to place, so they get in clash with the local sedentary African farmers. So that, particularly the ones that are the nomads, they don't really have a good reputation, but they have a very rich history and culture, and they are one of the largest ethnic groups, by the way, in West Africa and in Africa, as a matter of fact, because they cut all the way, like I said, to Blue Nile State in Sudan, and you can even go and see some of them in places like Eritrea. The Fulanis, but they appear in like different names. You see them the Resegat, or the Falata, or the Pule, or the Fulbe. So they come in different groups, but these are the same people that belong to the group of the Chadian languages. Okay, so like I said, you can find them across, East, West, and Central Africa. Places like Nigeria, Cameroon, Mali, Senegal, Niger, Burkina Faso, all the way even to places like Mali, like I mentioned. And the Fulanis are believed to have originated from the Senegal Valley, River Valley around the first millennium AD. So these are sedentary people, like I said. They are nomadic people, like I said. They are traditionally pastoralists. They are nomads. They are known for herding their cattle and moving across the Sahel in search of grazing land. Their language, the Fulfulde. This, by the way, this is what they speak in my own part of West Africa. It is of different variations. So they speak, because even in Nigeria, not a lot of people know about the language Fulfulde. So Fulfulde is the language. And if you go to places like Niger, they call them the Pil or the Pule. Or if you go to places like Cameroon, they call them the Pule. The Mali, they call them Pule. But in Nigeria, we call them the Fula or the Fulani. And in Mali, in places like um, uh, Sudan, you have some of them being called the Falata or the Resegat. By the way, if you look at the conflict in Sudan happening right now between the Sudanese armed forces and the head of the RSF, if you look at his history, he's from the Resegat tribe, and this Resegat are closely linked to the Fulani. So you see exactly what I'm saying. So the Resegat or the Falata is from that particular tribe. Um, Dagalo and his brother, I forgot the name in a second, but if you look at how the whole stuff happened with a guy called Musa Hilal and Hemeti are from the same tribe, and they're connected. In fact, their history links back to Chad. They are not really from Sudan, but it was the British and the French and the Europeans that partitioned Africa in 1804, 1805. So these people have always been moving across the belt of Central Africa and West Africa. So they are all the same people. Anyways, let's stay on topic and get back to the conversation. Like I said, yeah, the Fulanis, are part of the Niger Congo family. If you look at their ancient roots in West Africa, and although some theories have linked them to North Africa, and some people believe that they have mixed their blood over a millennia, with Arabs, so they are Arabized, if you like, over time, but they have their own distinct language and identity. This is the most important thing, okay? They are not speaking the Arabic language. Some of them understand the Arabic language, but they have mixed their blood with Arabs over a long period of time, particularly over a millennia. So these are, African people, blend of some Arabic blood in them, if you like. This is why people in Africa are very suspicious of them, particularly people, the Niger Congo people. If you look at people like me with broad nose and broad face, and the Fulanis are slim, they have slim face and curly hair, and they're long limb and they're tall. And most of them, the traditional occupation of the Fulanis is not is that they are nomads, they are pastoralists. Please, I want questions, as we continue this conversation. Full bay or the peel? Exactly. You can call them the Fulani or Fulbe or the Pure. And I said they are like in different categories. You have the Mbororo, you have the Fulbe Adamawa, there are so many of them. And by the way, the largest population of the Fulani is in Nigeria. Senegal have about 5 million of them, Guinea about 4 million, Cameroon, and Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Benin, Mauritania, Guinea-Bissau, Gambia, Chad, Sierra Leone, Central Africa, Sudan, like I told you, there are over 300, close to 300,000 Fulanis in Sudan, even in Ghana, in Togo, in Algeria, Ivory Coast, and South Sudan. Like I said, they're all over Africa. And they have a total population of close to, I think, 30 to 45 million, if I'm not mistaken. So they are everywhere. And by the way, if you look at the history, and even in recent time, most of the top prominent leaders in some important African countries have been Fulanis. For instance, in Cameroon, before Paul Biya came to power, Amadou Ahijo was Fulani. How many Africans know this? Not a lot. Muhammadu Buhari of Nigeria was Fulani. How many Africans know this? Not a lot. Macky Sall, the former president of Senegal and the vice president of Gambia now, is Fulani. Adama Barrow is Fulani. It's a lot. So many of them. Sierra Leonean President Mohamed Jules Dejalo is Fulani. Um, the Prime Minister of Mali, Bubu Sise, is Fulani. The wife of the Vice President of Ghana, Samira Bouima, is Fulani. So they have key people in prominent positions in Africa and even in international organizations. The 74th President of the United Nations General Assembly, Tijani Mohamed Bande, is Fulani. The Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations right now. How many of you know this? The Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations is from Nigeria, by the way. Amina Mohammed was a former minister in Nigeria. She's Fulani. How many people know this? Not quite a lot. So, like I said, the Secretary General of OPEC, Mohamed Sanusi Barkindo, as well, is Fulani. So, the Fulani people are prominent people in politics and in society, and particularly in Central and West Africa. Across the Sahel, they are one of the most important group in the Sahel. But what really gains attention about the Fulanis in particular is the clashes between the Fulanis and the sedentary African farmers. So yeah, as we go along and you guys ask questions, I'll continue to have this conversation. Now, this is my area of strength, by the way. So if you're hearing me going like this, like this, like this, my area of strength, um, this is what I love talking about. Although I've dabbled into other aspects of politics, which is really controversial, especially if you're an outsider, they'll tell you, "Oh, get the fuck out! You're not supposed to be talking about this topic." Why would an African guy talk about the conflict in the Middle East or in Europe? That you should focus more on Africa. Maybe I should be doing that at this point in time. It is important, but again, I consider myself a geopolitical enthusiast, so I move from place to place and discuss topics like this because it's stimulating to me. It's interesting to have this conversation so we can learn from each other, and it's another way of learning. When you discuss topics like this. So again, I talked about the history of the Fulani people. It goes back, like I said. You can talk about the Futaturu and Futajalo. Give me a second. I need to drink water. Oh man, this is so the history of the Fulanis go back in time. You can look at the Futaturu and Futajalo, and these are two historically significant regions in West Africa, and both of them are associated with the Fulani, or what I call the Fulbe people, or as some people call them, the Pil. The establishment of the Islamic theoretical state in the 18th and the 19th century. And let's look at the difference between the Futaturu and Futajalo. Like I said, it's along the river Senegal, in present-day Senegal and Mauritania. It's dominated by the Tukolor, which is a subgroup of the Fulanis. Like I said, the Fulanis are not a monolith. So, like you have the Tukolor, you have the Fulbe Adamawa, you have the Mbororo. They are of different ilk, but all of them belong to the same family. And like I said, the history emerged as a powerful Islamic state in the 18th century under Al-Mami Abu Qadar, who led the jihad to establish Sharia law. And the history goes back in time, particularly to places like Senegal and what you call modern day Guinea. So for Futatoro, it goes along the river Senegal. So you're talking about modern day Senegal and Mauritania. And for Futajalon, you're talking about Guinea. So these are the two main areas that the Fulanis came from. And if you look at their history, they move along the banks of the river Niger and Benue. It's very important because they are pastoralists and they are always in search for greener pasture for their cattle or for their livestock. They move across the bank of along the banks of the river and they migrate southwards. Okay, so they came from the east and migrated. They came from the west and migrated all the way to the east. But as they are moving along that line, they're also migrating southwards, particularly to places like Nigeria and Ghana and Gambia and Senegal and so on and so forth, in search of greener pastures. Um, so, like I said, both of them operated different systems, particularly the highlands of Guinea. You have the Pule and the other groups like the Jalonke. They are of different subgroups. So, if you really want to know more about the Fulani people and the history, you can ask questions, or I can come in our next conversation and just talk about the Fulani. I can discuss it for like 2 hours. So Nigeria, of course, our topic today is how the Fulani Jihad of 1804 shaped the history of modern Nigeria, particularly in the north. And prior to 1800, an early civilization in Nigeria. Nigeria was home to advanced societies like the North culture, which is in modern day Kaduna State. It's in a place called um, oh, I forgot. It's in Kaduna State, but it's in the southern part of Kaduna State. So, for those of you that want to know, understand Nok civilization, can anybody write it in the comment section? Nok civilization or the Nok culture. Write it in the comment section and tell me what you see about the Nok culture. It's very important, which lasted from around 500 BC to 200 CE, um, which is known mostly for the terracotta sculpture. So the Nok culture is uh, is also one of the forms one of the pillars or blocks of Nigerian history and civilization. And different kingdoms and empires existed in Nigeria prior to the Reformation or the Jihad in 1804. So we are looking at how the by the way, let's go back to the topic. We're looking at how historical events like the Jihad of 1804 or what the Fulanis call the Reformation shaped the history of modern Nigeria. So prior to the 1800s, Nigeria had its own civilization way back in time, prior to the Reformation of the Jihad in northern Nigeria in 1804, and prior to the Berlin Conference of 1884-1885, which was later on in Nigerian history. Of course, Nigeria did not exist as Nigeria at that time. They were existing in different city states and different chiefdoms and kingdoms, and we are going to talk about that. Like I said, the kingdoms and empires, powerful states, including particularly in the northern Nigeria, you have the Kanem Bronu, which is in around the Lake Chad area, and I'll talk about that. That's a separate topic. We can talk about the history of the Kanem Bronu. We can talk about the Hausa Kingdom, the Yoruba Kingdom, the Benin Kingdom, and the Igbo Kingdom. These were like the pillars or the major blocks of civilization in Nigeria. Within those kingdoms, you have different chiefdoms, particularly in the eastern part of Nigeria, where it was more acephalous, because the Igbos at that time, even when the British colonial masters came, they didn't accept their rule. They refused to accept it. While in the Yoruba land, you have something that resembled more like a republican system. And one of my friends was very happy, like, "Oh, I didn't know you know about the Bale and Areona Kakanfo and the history of the Alaafin of Oyo." So the history of the Yoruba, kingdoms. We are going to talk about them. I can unpack them one after the other. It's not just Nigeria. Anywhere in Africa, we can pick and discuss all of this because it's very important. Um, and by the way, I should do more of this as well on other platforms like TikTok. And maybe this is what I should do more while I do my straight interviews and all of that, because for the past 1 year and a half I've been focusing on talking about other topics. And yeah, maybe I should spend more time talking about Africa, like people have been clamoring. And by the way, this is my area of suit. This is my area of strength, and I can talk about this until the cows come home. Anyways, let's continue the conversation. So, like I said, prior to the 1800s, you have this. kingdoms, or you can categorize them into the Hausa kingdoms, the Kanem Brunu Empire, which is a very important empire in the lead up to uh, to the 15th or 16th or the 19th century, where slavery and whatever happened. So the Hausa kingdom, the Kanem Brunu Empire, the Yoruba kingdoms, the Benin kingdom, which was mostly the south, very famous for bronze, their art and their central monarchy. I talked about the the uh, quasi-republican system that they had in the Yoruba land. They had the monarch and particularly the old Oyo Empire, like I talked about, and of course the Benin Kingdom as well, famous for the bronze and the art and the monarchy, and also the Igbo city states. Very decentralized. The Igbos were a problem from the beginning. They would not accept any the rule of any authority. They were the ones that fought against the British. They resented the British. They stood against the British. They put their foot down. The Igbos are warriors, by the way. So when people look at them today and they see, why are these guys so stubborn? No, it's their history. This is who they are. They will not accept the rule by one man. They don't. They are not people that cowered in fear and acquiesce, although sometimes it can be a little bit too much. And they are very industrious. If you look at the Igbos of Nigeria today, it is nothing dissimilar to what their history, and civilization have, and has evolved over time, but they still remain the same. Okay, and this is why you see them anywhere they go to, they succeed, but they don't really accept leadership at the center. They believe in a more of devolution of power. People talk about democracy in the West. The Igbos had it way before them, before even anybody could think about it. In the northern part of Nigeria, it was completely different. When the British came, they succeeded in the northern part of Nigeria because they had uh, the direct rule system was very, very effective. The indirect rule system was very effective by the British in northern Nigeria. Why? Because the Hausa kingdoms, or in northern Nigeria, you already have a caliphate. You had a system in place that would made it possible for the leaders to take direct instruction from the British colonialists and pass the information down to the public or to their people. And by the way, you had there's this theory of divine ordinance. The people believed in the ordinance of the king or of the monarch. The Sultan was very powerful. They believed in the power of the Sultan. They believed in the power of the monarch. And the monarch was not just the political leader, he was also the spiritual guardian. And they believed that whatever the king is telling them represents the position of God, almost. So whatever information he gives them, people follow and toe the line of the king. It was different in the Yoruba land because you had a system of checks and balances where you have the Alaafin, you have the Oyomesi, you have the Ogboni cult, which is like more or less a republican system. So the Alaafin, there was also the position of the prime minister that was led by I forgot in a second, but you had the Alaafin who was the king, and it was in that order. So it was a system of checks and balances in the Yoruba land. But in the Igbo kingdoms or the Igbo city states, for every family, you have a leader. For every chiefdom, for every kingdom, the Igbos were very acephalous, very difficult to handle, particularly if you want to look at it from the prism or the position of the British. And this is why the British imposed a direct rule system in the Igbo city states or in the Igbo lands and appointed warrant chiefs. And also that culminated to what the Aba women riot, I think I forgot, it's 1920 or 21. There was the Aba women riot. Can somebody check up the date for me? I think let's look at the Aba women riot. Let's look at the with you in earlier. Thank you so much, Jamilu. Somebody should check the Aba women riot and what dates. Right? Somebody should write the Aba women riot in the comments. Let's go. I want to see you write the Aba women riot in the comment section. Let's go. And what led to the Aba women riot, I will explain in a second. But I want you to write it in the comment section. The Aba women riot. Let's go. The Aba women riot. Okay, I need to. I don't know. My box is not moving. So by the way, if you want us, we can look at the Aba women riot that happened, I think, in 1920. I'm not really sure. Let's see. Yeah, the Aba women riots. So it was in 1929, actually. I know it was in the 20s. So the Aba Women riot happened in 1929. It was a significant protest by Nigerian women against unfair taxation. I told you guys about this already. And I'll quickly do this before we continue and stay on topic and talk about the real conversation. So with the Aba Women riot of 1929, the women came out in Aba is in modern day Abia State in southeastern Nigeria. They came out naked, protesting against the British unfair taxation against their husbands. The women were like, "We've had enough. That these guys are asking us to pay too much tax." And the argument of these women is that you, the British, are the ones that are printing this money. You are the one in charge of everything. So if you are printing this money in form of paper and coins, why are you asking us to pay tax to you? If you need more money, why don't you just go and print more money if you need to make more money than asking us to pay tax? And if you remember, at that point, the British have changed our system from the barter system to the trading in cash crop. In fact, to the trading in currency, but also the economic model in Nigeria was changed completely from subsistence to planting or to farming cash crops, which was designed to serve the industries in Europe. Because remember, the industrial revolution had happened earlier in Europe. There's a lot of changes that happened in Europe. So the Europeans depended on countries in Africa or their presence in Africa to continue to provide raw materials for their industries, things like timber and cocoa and cotton and rubber and so on and so forth. And the same thing happened in Congo. Remember what King Leopold was demanding, that the Congolese were to supply more rubber and more rubber. And those that were not able to meet their quota, they were chopping off their hand to send an example to others to continue to work hard to, to feed the industries in Europe. That was the situation. So this was the background to the Aba Women riot. Was a significant, historical event in Nigeria where women protested against unfair taxation and oppressive practices, showcasing their strength and resilience. Exactly what I said. The reason why the Aba Women riot happened was because the British were forcing the men, the southeastern men, the Igbos, mostly what you call Igbo land today, but also in places like Delta and so on and so forth. They were forcing them to pay tax. And these guys were like, hang on a second, we can't continue to do this. This is unfair. You can't continue to ask us to pay tax because we are paying tax and you are the one printing the money. If you need more money, why don't you just go and print more money? So this was the background to the whole stuff, particularly in the lead up to the 1800, the early civilizations in Nigeria. The reason why I'm breaking down all of this and digressing in some cases is to give you an elaborate understanding of what happened in Nigeria prior to colonialism and during colonialism. So again, let's stay on the 1800 and what happened. Like I said, there were different kingdoms and empires and powerful states, that existed prior to the Jihad or the Reformation by the Fulanis in 1804 in northern Nigeria. So you have the Hausa kingdoms existed in northern Nigeria, were known for trade and Islamic scholarship. The Kanem Borno as well, which is around the area of the Lake Chad area, and I'll show you guys on the map in a second. And you have the Yoruba kingdoms, and you have the Benin kingdom, and the Igbo societies. Okay, and I'll put that up in the map for you guys to see in a second. And also, from the 1500 to the 1900, you have the transatlantic slave trade with the Europeans, particularly the Portuguese, were the ones that came in with religion. They came with the Bible, but they were capturing Africans and selling them. And the British as well came in later on and engaged in the slave trade, particularly through ports like Badagry and Calabar. So the port of Badagry is in Lagos, by the way. Escapades and travels. I went to Badagry recently. It was through Badagry that I went to Benin Republic. So they were taking people from the hinterland in Nigeria and sending them to the coast and putting them on boats and sending them to Europe and North America during the slavery. That was what was happening. And in Calabar is also in the southern part of Nigeria. I'll pull up the map for you guys to see. Let's look at the map of Nigeria. I'm going to show you guys the map in a second. Um, don't forget, if you have questions, write them down. But if you want, I also want you guys to continue to share this. For those of you that are going to watch this video after the live stream ends, please, I urge you guys to share it on different platforms. Like I said, this conversation is meant to last for 1 hour or thereabout. Well, it could go to an hour, 30 minutes. It all depends on when I'm able to exhaust the key points that I want to address. And I hope we continue this kind of conversation. It goes on and on and on and on. Okay. Um, Thank you so much, guys. Thank you. I'm going to pull up the map of Nigeria for you guys to see in a second. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. All right. So this is what the map of Nigeria is. So what they were doing at that time is that, like I said, if you look at, you see the northern part of Nigeria. If you look at the northern part of Nigeria, you see the places around where you see Meduguri. I'm going to give me a second so I can make the map bigger. Oh, it's big enough around Meduguri. You see the place around Meduguri. Meduguri is in this place. All this area was a Kanem Borno. I want you guys to write Flora Shore. Write Flora Shore. Okay. I'm going to show you guys something about that really quickly. So my internet keeps disconnecting. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to connect to another source. So my internet keeps disconnecting. So I connected to another source to make it more stable. So while you're doing that, I need another person to write Mary Slessor. So these two people are key in terms of understanding Nigerian history and evolution over time. Although Flora Shaw came later on, Mary Slessor was important in the killing of twins that was happening by on the I think the Efik people in Calabar. The reason I'm talking about this is because we needed to understand why the Calabar was used as a shipping hub and why they were using it to transport the slaves or people they captured from the hinterland and sent them downwards as slaves. So Flora Shaw was the one that coined the name Nigeria. That's why I put it up. So Mary Slessor, Mary Slessor, Slessor with an R in front of the O. So the spelling has to be correct. Mary Slessor. So Mary Slessor was the person that is credited to stop the killing of twins because in that part of Nigeria at that time, they were actually, if twins were born, they were killing them because they believe they were unaliving them, so they don't flag this live stream. They were unaliving them, so because they think that the twins were of that it was evil for somebody to give birth to twins. So they were unaliving them, and it was Mary lessons like, oh, now you guys can't keep doing this, and because it was their tradition at that time, particularly the Efik people and some other people around southern Nigeria that were doing that. So the sacrifice still exists basically even in Nigeria. I don't know about that, but maybe in some places in Nigeria today. But Mary Slessor, was the one that actually came and said, no, you guys cannot do this because they believe the babies were evil spirits. And the mother was guilty of grievous sin. So that's why they were unaliving them. Because they believe that so I'm going to stop my tab for a second. So you guys can see. So the name is Mary Slessor. You can check up Mary Slessor, Flora Shaw. These are some of the names as I'm writing them down and you guys are writing in the comment section is good. It's important for us to to continue to look at these names and engage with them. By the way, you guys are amazing. You guys are amazing. You guys are amazing for participating in this conversation. It goes a long way to spurring me up to continue because when I see you guys engaging, particularly in the comment section, it goes a long way. Don't forget to share this stream to many people. For those of you watching the stream, after the live stream have ended, you can share it to different groups as well. It is very vital. I was going to continue. Yeah, basically, so um, the reason I gave you guys that background is for you to understand the transatlantic trade, slave trade that happened, particularly between the 15th and the 19th century. And during the colonial era as well, lasted between the 1800 uh, to 1960, the abolition of the British expansionist idea and the Sokoto Caliphate lasted from 1804 to 1903. And we will talk about the amalgamation in 1914, going to talk about the colonial economy. I think I talked about the colonial economy as well, which is focused more on cash crop. They were preventing Nigeria from, at that time, from being subsistence or subsistent because we're planting stuff for our own consumption and feeding ourselves. And the British colonialists were like, hang on a second, you guys cannot do that. You have to feed our industries in Europe. So they were encouraging Nigerians to produce these cash crops and feed the industries that they had in Europe. And what else? Again, so of course, we'll talk about independence and post colonial Nigeria. But let's look at the real crux of the issue and what we are discussing today, which is the Reformation or the Jihad of 1804. So the key question here is how did the Jihad of 1804 influence modern Nigeria? That is a key question. Now let's look at the Jihad of 1804. It was led by a guy called Uthman Dan Fodio. I want you guys to write it in the comment section. Uthman Dan Fodio, Uthman, Uthman Dan Fodio, who had a profound and lasting impact, on modern Nigerian history. And we're going to look at the formation of the Sokoto Caliphate, the formation of the Gwandu Caliphate, the spread of Islam in northern Nigeria. It wasn't like Islam was not already in northern Nigeria, but he wanted to accelerate the understanding of Islam and the spread of Islam southwards. Okay, it was there, but the Hausas also had their own independent city states. They had their own independent kingdoms. Like I mentioned before, you have the Kanu, you have the Gobir, Zaria, and Castina. There were four of them. The city states. Again, I'll go with Castina, Zaria, Gobir, and Kanu. So the Hausas had their own city states and they had their own system before the jihad happened in 1804. Like I said, the Hausa city states were a group of independent war cities in what is now northern Nigeria and some bit of southern Niger, because northern Nigeria, southern Niger, the whole places were carved up as a result of the Berlin Conference of 1804, 1805. But let's look at the history of the major ones: the Kanu, Castina, Zaria, which I mentioned earlier. Guys, if you didn't get anyone out of this, make sure you know where Zaria is and Gobir. So Zaria was called Zazao. And I talked about Queen Amina of Zazao. Can anybody write it in the comment? Write Queen Amina of Zazao in the comment section. Uh, please do that. Let's write Queen Amina of Zazao. So Zazao is what you now call Zaria today. I'm not even allowed to write in the comment. I don't know whether I'm allowed to write. So you have Queen Amina of Zazao. I'm guessing the spelling. Oh, so no, you're not guessing the spelling. So I talked about Mary Slessor. I'm going to write the name Mary Slessor as well. So Mary Slessor. So this is Mary Slessor. The name, if you want, you can take a look at the name. It's Mary Slessor. And yeah, what else? So, like I said, this Hausa had their own independent city states. Like Kano is one of the powerful and prosperous city states. They have these dye pits, and by the way, it's still there in Kano today. If you go to Kano today, they go to for making these traditional wrappers, and they dye them. They do dyeing. They do cloth dyeing. They give them this colorful stuff. It's in Kano today. You see the dyeing pits. They are in Kano today. I'm going to write that in the comment as well. So if you want to understand the history of, yeah, so the dying pits, Let's look at the dying pits in Kano. Again, this is another one you guys need to take a look at. I want you to take a look at the dye pits in Kano and the dye pits in Kano, which is mostly pivotal to textile industry and also at the period of the trans-Saharan trade. And of course, the Kano Chronicle and the documents history, including the reign of Sarki Muhammad Rumfa, which ruled from around 1463 to 1499, who introduced a lot of Islamic reforms. So it's not like Islam was completely absent from northern Nigeria before the Reformation or the Jihad of 1804 led by Uthman dan Fodio. Okay, and we'll talk about that. Castina is another place, was a major center for Islamic learning and commerce. It rivaled Kano in terms of wealth and influence and became a key hub for scholars and traders from North Africa. Most of them were coming in through Maradi, which is Maradi is in Niger. They were coming through Maradi and going through Castina, which is the has a border with Castina have a border with Niger Republic as we have today. And of course, people were coming from the north and they were transiting through Castina. Some of the Islamic scholars that were coming from places like Mali and Algeria, they were coming all from the north and they were coming to Castina and coming to Kano. And then Zazao was ruled by a legendary queen, Amina of Zazao, in the late 16th century, a warrior queen who expanded the kingdom and known for her military strength and military advances and supplying captives to the trans-Saharan trade. You know, she was also involved in the trans-Saharan trade as well. And we also look at Gobir. But this was all in the lead up, like I said, to the jihad or the reformation by Uthman dan Fodio in 1804, 1805. Remember, the topic of our conversation is the jihad of 1804 and modern Nigeria. But I'm giving you a background to how it all happened and what was in existence, what pre-existed before the Reformation in northern Nigeria, and some of the excuse that was cited for this takeover, for some of this reform was the political corruption and inequality, and particularly in if you look at northern Nigeria, what they call the Banza Bokwe, which I would explain in a second. It was mostly like a caste system that was in existence. So corrupt. It was like more or less like a caste system that was operational in northern Nigeria. So that was the excuse that they gave. So the Hausa Bokwe, Banza Bokwe, or the Bokwe system was the seven Hausa states, such as Kanu, Katsina, Zazzau, Gobi. They were powerful city-states ruled by the Habe kings or the Sarki. However, during the late 18th century, many of them became notoriously corrupt due to heavy taxation, nepotism, abuse of power. So there were seven kingdoms or chiefdoms or whatever you want to call them, which were ruled by the Habe kings. But there were also the Banza Bokwe. So there were seven notable sons, and there were the seven unfortunate or the misguided ones, which were the Banza Bokwe. For those of you that understand Hausa, you can please let's look at the meaning of Banza in Hausa. Banza is, yeah. So I'm going to write it in the comment section as well. It's called the Banza Bokwe. Banza Bokwe. So you can check it up and look at the meaning of Banza Bokwe. Uh, so there were seven operated under seven kingdoms, and I mentioned the name of the prominent ones. Four of them: Castina, Gobir, Kano, and Zazao. Those were the four prominent ones that were well known at that point. And like I said, as a result of this corruption and nepotism, social inequality, the ruling elites, the commoners as well were called the Talakawa. They were the peasants and artisans, and how they were treated. Okay, the Hausas, of course, when you talk about social inequality, it was a rigid system at that time where you have the ruling elite, the Sarauta, which were the kings, the notables, the merchants. The ruling class basically were known. So you have like the gentry, like you have in the UK. In previous time you had the rule of the gentry and you have the commoners. It was the same thing in Nigeria, particularly in the north. And you have the Talakawa are the ordinary people, the people they call the peasants and the artisan, the small traders, and they were the ones that were carrying the load of the taxation. They did a lot more. They were the ones that were doing the farming. They were the ones that were still trafficked as slaves during the trans-Saharan trade, slave trade, and so on and so forth. So, and of course, there were religious divide. The elites claimed to be Muslim, but often mix Islamic practices with pre-Islamic Hausa tradition. So, and I will talk about that in a second. If people talk about animism in Africa, it's still in existence today. But the reason why Ottoman and Fodio cited of bringing those reforms is because of what they call the Mugazawa system or the Mugazawa. And for those of you in southern Nigeria, if you're Yoruba, you know about this animism. People worship like different deities and so on. And so it was the same thing in the northern Nigeria. So they were mixing animism with Islam. People were doing that in the south as well, mixing up traditional African religion and culture with Christianity. So it was the same religious divide that the poor, especially in the rural areas, still practice their indigenous religion or what they call syncretic Islam. Angering reformists like the Uthman and Fodio, they're like, hang on a second. Uthman and Fodio was like, hang on a second. Why are you guys still practicing this they call it idolatry or idol worshiping, but these were our traditional African belief systems and practices that were there at that point. It was not dissimilar from the situation we had also in the southern part of Nigeria. So this was all of this, were created a fertile ground that led up to the Jihad of 1804, 1804, basically, that led to the establishment of the Gwandu and the Sokoto Caliphate, particularly around the area of 1804. And yeah, so let's go to the main cross of the issue, which is the declaration of the Jihad in 1804. Like I said, this gave the oxygen to why Othman and Fodio led what you call the reform. And this was attack on the city states and to collapse the city states and form caliphates under the rule of the Amir al-Mu'minin, which was also called the leader of the faithful. So this is not different from from what you guys hear in the Middle East. They try to do exactly the same thing in Africa. So the leader of the faithful is after it happened, and his brother Bello, became the head of the Emirates in Gwandu, and himself was, stayed in Sokoto with his son, and he was now they gave him the title of the leader of the faithful or the Amir al-Mu'minin uh, of the Al Khalifa al Muslimin, the leader of the Caliphate of the Muslims or of the of the believers. So, like I said, Usman Dan Fodio himself was an Islamic scholar and a reformer, and he fought against the Yunfar and the ruler of Gobir, which is the Hausa kingdom, like I talked about earlier. And the Fulani War, or what they call the Jihad of 1804, lasted until 1808, which led to the establishment of the Sokoto Caliphate, one of the largest Islamic states in Africa during the 19th century. And he talked about his reforms, and I'll talk about that in a second. He was a sheikh himself in the Qadriya Sufi order, so he was a Sufist and practiced Islamic revivalism, and criticized. At that point, he was also criticizing the Hausa leaders because he believed that they were mixing up traditional African practices with Islam, and this was, in his opinion, not okay. So this was why he waged the war in order to bring about the reform. And he also talked about the oppression of the Talakawa. Again, I talked about the Talakawa earlier. The Talakawa are the downtrodden. They are the peasants, the ordinary people of the society. So it's the same thing as the Middle East. Exactly. So I'm going to write the meaning of the word Talakawa. Not a lot of Nigerians are online at this point. Most of them are sleeping. Maybe I should be streaming this maybe earlier on, like maybe like 7 p.m. my time or 6 p.m. my time, and maybe it will gain a lot of attention going forward. Yeah, but again, I don't know. It's this is a topic I enjoy. By the way, it's easy. I enjoy it, so I can talk about this until the cows come home. And, what else? What else? What else do I need to talk about? I think I talked about how Ottoman and Fodio came, and with the declaration of the jihad in 1804. He talked about the oppression of the minorities, and he also talked about the syncretism, meaning that the Hausas at that point with the other tribes were mixing traditional African beliefs and practices with Islam. And he said it was not okay. That's why he wanted to launch a war to reform, basically, in what they call the Fulani War, which lasted from 1804 to 1808. And by the declaration of the jihad in 1804, Ottoman and Fodio calls on arms, framing the struggle as a defensive jihad. By the way, I was on one of the live stream of one of these guys, and they talked about defensive jihad against tyranny and un-Islamic rule. He accused Yonfa and the Hausa rulers of oppression, which is Zulum, and imposing illegal taxes. If you listen to most of the live stream of some of these guys, they also talk about defensive jihad. They believe that this is them fighting against oppression. So they believe that it is a noble cause to have like defensive jihad. So they talked about that as well. So his followers, known as the Torobe, which were the Fulani clerics and allies, rallied around his leadership, and that culminated to his military success in 1908. He defeated Gobir and the Hausa states, which were, like I said, the Kano, Kastina, and Zaria, and established the Sokoto Caliphate and became the Sarkin Muslimun. Like I talked about, he became the leader of the faithful. They call it the Amir al Muminin or Sarkin Muslimin, the commander of the faithful, and his followers set up Islamic State based on Sharia law. And the legacy of the Sokoto Caliphate became a major political and religious force in West Africa until British colonialism and conquest in the early 20th century. So when the British came, the British did not really tamper with what was in existence. They made some modification, but they allowed them to continue to exist in that way because it has a structure in place that made it easy for the British to carry out what they call, it made it easier for the British to have um, an indirect rule system. The British found it possible to have an indirect rule system because the caliphate was already in place at that point. Ottoman and Fodio and his followers had defeated the Hausa kingdoms, broke Castina, they broke Gobir, they broke Kanu and Zazao, and imposed, the Sharia law on the people. But this is the mistake a lot of people make. They think that, oh, okay, Islam was not in existence before the Reformation or the Fulani War that lasted between 1804 and 1808. Of course, it was in existence, but what Danfodio argued is that he was coming to stop the oppression of the Talakawa and also to stop the what he believed were practices that were against or anathema to the teachings of Islam. And he did that and succeeded in 1808. But when the British came in the later period of the 18th century or thereabout, they decided to leave it in place because, in fact, if you look at the leadership of the leader of the Northern Protectorate, um, who later led to the who later led the amalgamation of the Northern and Southern Protectorate, Lord Lugard, in 1914, he he implemented the indirect rule system in the northern. So the British did not have to go to northern Nigeria, although it was bigger in population and bigger in landmass. The British did not have to go there with a lot of personnel. They just gave instruction to different regional directors, and the regional officers were giving instruction directly to the kings or to the monarchs and the Islamic rulers that were passing the same information to the people because the people believe in the theory of divine ordinance. They believe that the people were should and the people should be submissive to the king and uh, and the rulers because they believe that it is by divine ordinance that somebody is appointed as a leader. And they even went further to claim that if a king is bad, it's because of the sins of the people that they have committed that God have sent them a wicked king. So if the king is good, well, it's a blessing from God because the people have not sinned against God. So this was the simple theory of divine ordinance that was also in existence in the caliphate, or even before then in the city states, the Hausa city states and Gobir before the Reformation or the Fulani War in 1804. It was slightly different, but more or less the same. But it is different. It was completely different in the southern part of Nigeria, particularly in places like the Igbo land, where they met a lot of resistance. So let's go for that to talk about the significance. Like I talked about, he did religious reform. There was a political reorganization of the whole system and structure that were in place, and it also have a socio-cultural impact on the relationship between the Fulanis and the Hausa people in what you have in modern day Nigeria today. Okay, and eventually, like everything will fall. Empires will come and fall. Um, the Hausa the Fulani Caliphate later, fell for different reasons, particularly um, because of the emergence of British colonial rule, the trans-Saharan trade, and also the I'm forgetting that I need to drink water, and also because of the amalgamation of 1914 in the lead up to the First World War by Lord Frederick Lugard, who at that time was the governor of the Northern Protectorate, but later became Governor General of Nigeria after the amalgamation in 1914. And the reason the British did the amalgamation in 1914 was because they were scared of losing the territories that they already acquired, and this was in the lead up to the First World War. So if there's any question you want to ask, feel free to ask me. And by the way, I'm going to play something about the Fulanis for you guys to look at in a second. Um, the Talak is like the Dalit. Yeah, the Talakawa are the downtrodden. So I'm going to get water in a second. Don't forget to continue to engage with this video. It goes a long way. I need to get. Let's go. Yeah. Welcome back. Yeah, yeah. Somebody say, man, that was a long 1 hour. Hey, I used to do this for 2 hours. I don't know. I'm just lazy these days. Yeah. I get easily exhausted. I don't know why, but I have to find out. So yeah, okay. You want to see? Let's look at what the Talakawa looks like. I told you the Talakawa are the downtrodden. Uh, So in Nigeria, we call them the Almajiri, right? The Talakawa are like the downtrodden. So Almajiri is, I mean, I don't know. That's not the right word. It's called Al Muhajirun. So Al Muhajirun, welcome. The Al Muhajirun, um, the Al Muhajirun, or what they call what is the right word? The Al Muhajirun were the like emigrants because there was a movement from Mecca to Medina. Um, what's the right word? There was a movement from Mecca to Medina by the Prophet himself, and this was what was called that's why they call them the emigrants. So you can check up the word Al Muhajirun. So in Nigeria, you call some of those Talakawa, some of those downtrodden, some of them move from place to place to seek help and support, and some of them grew up basically because they don't have parents, so they move from one place to another. But that doesn't really define give the complete understanding of Al Muhajirun. It's they call them Talakawa because the word Talakawa simply means the peasants, the downtrodden. Everybody that is below, the whole. Hey, what's up, Chris? Welcome, guys. It's a lot of information. Yeah, we've talked about a lot today. If you're just joining, I'm sure you missed a lot, but this is going to stay up. And I'm going to use the Restream. So if I use Restream, I'm going to download this video and segment it and restream it. So after this live stream ends, I'm going to do a restream of this particular section, but I'm going to like edit some part of it and remodel it so that you guys can get the complete information about. Yeah, the Al-Muhajirun refers to the early Muslim migrants who left their homes to seek refuge and establish communities in new lands, particularly during the time of the Hijrah. Exactly, that's what I said. The prophets and the subsequent expansion of Islam. So you can check Hijrah. And by the way, I'm a Christian, so how did Sam know most of these things? So the Hijrah refers to the period where people, the migration from Mecca to Medina. So this is what they call the Al-Muhajirun. Yeah, so it's called the Hijrah. So I got this app now that I'm paying a lot of money for uh, that allows me to stream like this and allows me to not just stream like this, but allows me to Give me a second. Allows me to stream like this, but also allows me to restream it. So I can, restream the video if you like, and like pick the most important parts and discuss. So this is the highlight of our conversation, and I'm going to take it one after the other. For those of you that are just joining, the topic of our conversation today is the Jihad of 1804, 1805, and what led to the Reformation or the Jihad of 1804. Prior to that, the Hausa city-states were in existence and Gobir. So you have Gobir, you have Zazao, which they call Zaria, you have Kano, and you have Castina. So these were the four, there were about seven of them, which they call the Bokwe, or some call the Banza Bokwe. So this were they were in existence in the lead up to the Reformation or the Jihad that was led by Ottoman and Fodio in 1804, and the Fulani War that lasted from 1804 to 1808, and the establishment of the Sokoto Caliphate and later the Gwando Caliphate. This is the background to our conversation. And then we went further to talk about the Fulani people and how their lifestyle. The Fulanis are mostly nomadic people. They call them the Fulani or the Pil or the Fulbe. And it's one of the biggest ethnic groups in West Africa and in the Sahel. There are about 60 million of them in Nigeria, Guinea, about 5 million or thereabout. You have them in Cameroon, in Mali, in Senegal, in Niger, all the way to Sudan. It's a very big group of people, but they are distinct, from the sedentary Niger Congo people like myself with broad face and broad nose and so on and so forth. So, but the occupation, most of them are pastoralists. Over time, things have changed basically, but they have been living together with the other African tribes for close to a millennia. So this is their home as well. And the history of the Fulani goes back in time as well to the 11th and the 16th century when the Fulanis migrated, eastward, and some of them came from the Sahel all the way. They're moving from the west to the east. By the way, in places like Futatoro and Futajalo. So Futatoro is what you know as modern day Senegal, and the Futajalo is what you know as modern day Guinea, and they move into the Hausa land in modern day Nigeria, and they played a key role in the proselytization of Islam. The Fulanis, particularly the key figure like Othman and Fodio, who was a Fulani Islamic scholar, was the one that led the Sokoto Caliphate Jihad of 1804 to 1808, and establishment of the Sokoto Caliphate, and later the Caliphate in Gwandu, and then proclaimed himself as the Amir al-Muminin, or the leader of the faithful, in what is now modern day Nigeria. Like I told you before, if you want to look at their history, the theocratic state of Guinea to Futajalo to Futatoro in modern day Senegal, in Messina Empire, in what is modern day Mali, and the area around the Adamawa Emirates, established by Modibo Adama, which is now modern day Nigeria and some part of Cameroon. So it's in the northeastern part of Nigeria. The Adama Emirate was a prominent emirate that was set up and established by a guy called Modibo Adama, in what you now call modern day Nigeria and Cameroon. And in pre-colonial times, you see the influence of the Fulani people, and also all the way to the post-colonial times. The Fulanis are still here today. And if you look at the migration of the Fulanis from the western part of the Sahel to the eastern part of the Sahel, and from the east to the west, they are always moving, migrating for greener pastures for their livestock. And like I said, they are distinct by their identities. And I showed you guys a picture of them during the traditional practice. Uh, um, they have this cultural practice that they call the Jerawol, which is an initiation process of young men into adulthood. They put up these costumes on their face, and they dress up in order to get the female, in order to get the mate. So you guys can also check what Jerawol is. Can somebody write Jerawol in the comment section? I'm going to write Jerawol. So this is what Jerawol looks like. So if you want, you can check up what Jerawol is. But I'll move on to give you guys the to wrap up the conversation really quickly. So that led to the emergence of the Fulanis moving westward, and this was how they came to northern Nigeria. And when they came, the Hausa people were already there with their city states, and also with other empires like the Kanem Brono and so on and so forth. So the Fulanis came and abolished what you had as the city states in the Hausa lands and established the caliphate in 1804. And they gave reasons like the oppression of the minorities. They talked about that the Hausas were not practicing the real Islam, that they were mixing it up with traditional African practices. Therefore, there was a need for reformation, and this was the conflict or the war led by the Fulanis and particularly by Uthman dan Fodio in what is known as the Fulani War between 1804 and 1805. And I talked about that already, and it has also played a profound role on the history of modern day Nigeria. So if you have any question in relations to Nigerian history and civilization and African history, Sahelian history and culture and civilization and politics, feel free to leave a comment on any of my videos. For those of you that are just coming on this live stream and watching this video, don't forget to share this video, download it if you want to see more of it, and also follow my page. I'm across all platforms like YouTube and Facebook and TikTok and so on and so forth.